Glory be to Jesus Christ. Good afternoon. I am pleased to welcome all our guests who are online.
Recording in progress.
In offline on this final international conference, which is dedicated to Just Peace in Ukraine. The title of current conference is Repairing the Wounds of War. What is Just Peace in Ukraine? And it's already a sixth conference in a row, which is organized with financial support and cooperation of our long-lasting partner, Notre Dame University. We were grateful to our partners, but it's not only the six when we see at this 3 last years, because of almost every single week we have some activities dedicated to Just Peace, dedicated to war, which are trying to bring forth what we call Just Peace in Ukraine. I'm also very grateful for all who are participating today. We know this is not the best time before the Christmas, but we would like to conclude this year with this conference. Our students today also have some their exams, but fortunately we will record this conference, and it will enable the possibility to watch all presentation which will be presented today. In my introductory word, I would like also present some of my reflection, which I would call Via Dolorosa to Just Peace in Ukraine. As already said, in partnership with Notre Dame University, since March 2023, we have convened 5 international conferences exploring the moral and theological dimensions of Russia's war against Ukraine. Our mission was to examine this war through a Christian lens, a challenging task given the initial global skepticism about Ukraine's chances. This skepticism stemmed not just from ignorance about Ukraine, but from a fundamental misunderstanding of Russia's true nature and capabilities. The Western world, shaped by decades of Russian propaganda, failed to see the true threat that Moscow posed. The civilized world's initial response revealed a troubling paradox. While many Western partners warned of Russia's inevitable invasion, they appeared strangely resigned to this catastrophic outcome. There was insufficient resolve to demonstrate to Putin that such aggression would carry an unbearable cost. The world's lack of faith in Ukraine was evident in their predictions at the beginning of the war. We were given days, perhaps weeks, before our resistance would collapse into guerrilla warfare. There was an implicit acceptance that Ukrainian blood would be the price of weakening Putin while containing the conflict within Ukraine's borders. Unfortunately, the Budapest Memorandum meant to guarantee Ukraine's security proved entirely ineffective. The West, founded on Christian values, hesitated to defend these same values in Ukraine in a proper way. Yet Ukraine defied these expectations, shocking the world by standing firm against what was considered the world's second strongest military power. This resilience emerged from several sources. First, Ukrainians demonstrated extraordinary courage and determination, with countless acts of self-sacrifice unprecedented in 21st century warfare. Second, as David Reef noted, This became the first conflict in recent years where the distinction between aggressor and victim, between truth and lies, was absolutely clear. Third, and crucially, we received vital support from our Western partners. While we often note that Western assistance comes too little or too late, and to be honest, we are always complaining because during the war you cannot, be very happy with things you are seeing around. But when, this assistance comes, as I already said, too late or too little, failing to grasp that Putin cannot be deterred by appeals to international law alone, we must acknowledge that without this support, I mean Western support, Ukraine's resistance would have been impossible. Courage and sacrifice, while essential, must be paired with weapons and resources. For this assistance, we remain profoundly grateful to our Western partners. Yet a just peace requires more than military aid. It demands coordinated action from the international community, political leadership, and global institutions. The reality of evil in our world remains poorly understood, especially by those fortunate enough to have avoided war, imprisonment, or torture. Even we Ukrainians, a nation that endured the Holodomor, the genocidal famine of 1932-1933, we also endured mass executions and systematic deportations to Siberia under Soviet rule. We were stunned by Russia's explicit declaration denying our very right to exist. Timofey Sergeytsev publication in RIA Novosti, which Timothy Snyder rightfully called a handbook for genocide, exemplifies this shocking reality. Many still refuse to acknowledge evil as a tangible force, a denial characteristic of our postmodern world. As our moral authority and dissident Miroslav Maronovich warns, unpunished and unredeemed evil does not simply vanish by itself. This war partly results from our failure to hold communism accountable through a Nuremberg-style reckoning. Our conference series with Notre Dame University charts an intellectual and moral journey toward understanding just peace. First, at the beginning on 22-23, at the conference Just Peace for Ukraine, Threats and Challenges, we established a fundamental principle. Aggressors cannot be appeased. They must be identified, condemned, and held accountable. In our second conference in this series, Just Peace for Ukraine, Foundation of Security Architecture in Ukraine and the World, which we held in Kyiv, examined the broader implication of Russian aggression. Putin's imperial ambitions and colonial mindset threaten not just Ukraine, but all nations bordering Russia. We are witnessing a theological crisis revealed when church leaders claim war is a defeat for all. This false equivalence ignores a crucial truth. War should represent defeat solely for the aggressor, and we, as a nation, have a God's-given right for a lawful defense. At new wine and old wine skin, the need for new thinking in Catholic teaching on Just Peace conference, we explored how diplomatic neutrality in the face of atrocity can become moral complicity. The conference on religious freedom, suppression of churches and religious organizations under the Russian regime, exposed how the Russian Orthodox Church, serving as the Kremlin's ideological arm, promotes the genocidal concept of Ruski Mir, or Russian world in English. Their methods echo Stalinist persecution, with only the executioners changed. As we enter the third year of war, fatigue affects both Ukraine and the West differently. Voices again suggest Ukraine should compromise with Russia, while businesses lobby to resume normal relations, or they propose to do business as usual. Our November conference, this year, last month, which was entitled Trading on Blood, the Morality of Doing Business with an Aggressor State, addresses these dangerous tendencies. We are convinced that the West must take decisive action to support Ukraine's path to just peace. And I think this should include, first, providing comprehensive military assistance, not just weapons, but also training, intelligence sharing, and technological support to protect civilian infrastructure. Second, implementing truly crippling economic sanctions that target not only Russian leadership, but also their enablers and the entire military-industrial complex. Third, strengthening international isolation of Russia through diplomatic means while bolstering support for Ukraine in global institutions. The United Nations Security Council must be reformed to prevent aggressors from wielding veto power against the very peace they threaten. The international community should establish a special tribunal for Russian war crimes and create a comprehensive reparation mechanism using frozen Russian assets. Furthermore, the West should help ensure Ukraine's long-term security through concrete defense guarantees, support for NATO integration, and assistance in building a robust defense industry. Economic recovery support must be paired with anti-corruption reforms and institutional strengthening. That is why I titled today's speech Via Dolorosa to Just Peace in Ukraine. This path of suffering demands perseverance, but it leads to justice. So each of us might have imagined a shorter journey when the enemy retreated from Kiev. We now understand that lasting peace requires complete victory over aggression. This is not merely the easiest path, it is the only right path. And we see that some people would like to frozen this war. They encourage us to appease Russia. But we cannot prolong this existence of this cancer, like it happened many times in history. Our generation should resolve this as our forefathers resolved the problem of Nazism, German Nazism, and we should courageously face this challenge and to do our homework and do not transfer this, painful inheritance to the next generation, because of appeasement of aggressor only stops killing and bloodshedding for a small moment of time, and as our history on the land which in some way is blessed by the Lord, but from other side, as Timothy Snyder said, bloodlands. It should become a land where people live with their realizing their God-given dignity, when they build a normal relationship, when they bring, children in this world, and when they build their life according to God's plan for their life, not human plans. So I am grateful for your attention. I see that I am not too long as I could be, so I guess it's promising. And since I am also moderator of this first panel, I am very glad to ask for the next report. My friend, I would say this, Jiří Dosoudil, who is recently earned his PhD in biblical theology, but he is from his first education, he is IT specialist. He worked many years for artificial intelligence. He helps me with my personal biblical website, To Live by the Word, is how we know each other. And I am very glad that he learned Ukrainian perfectly. We were talking maybe 1 or 2 years in English, but lately I discovered that he's completely fluent in Ukrainian. So I was surprised. So I'm very grateful that Jiří, taking on account all these unpleasant circumstances we live in, didn't afraid to come in person here. We welcome you, Jiří, and he will present his report with the title "The Metaphysics of Peace: The Meaning of a Just Peace in Ukraine for the World." I know this is not just for him, like, good theory as a scholar, because from the first very day when the full-scale invasion started, he helped Ukraine in Czech Republic as a volunteer, active volunteer, and my personal gratitude also for this. You're welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you also to Mr. Shurko for this very pleasant introduction. And it is, ladies and gentlemen, a big pleasure and joy for me to speak here at the Ukrainian Catholic University. And as Father Shurko said, my topic will be the metaphysics of peace. Well, this topic I'm going to talk about in my presentation is not often discussed with relation to peace, but it's relevant, as I will show you. Also, I will touch the topic of the meaning of just peace in Ukraine for the world. But before I start, let me please introduce the most fundamental moments my reflection is built upon. So, in other words, I'm asking, in which world are we talking about peace? And there's nothing new or surprising when I say that the Euro-Atlantic civilization, our world, is secularized, and to a large extent we can say it's already secular. We all know that Christianity constitutes a cultural phenomenon, not a living praxis, but on the other hand, it still lives from its Christian roots. So this is the basic fundamental fact. We will talk about peace in this world, in the world we live in. And speaking about this topic, it is definitely worth to mention Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, we all know him, expressed this idea with his famous phrase, the death of God. Of course, we may discuss in which way this is relevant, which idea of God is relevant, in which meaning that death is the good word for this idea. However, his observations are important for us today, and especially I would like to mention his reflection on the values as truth, justice, or goodness. Now, Nietzsche told us and showed that these values can become relative or empty in the modern world. This is a danger, and this is something we see more than 150 years after his death. And what also was Nietzsche's observation, these values are translated or are moved to the secular sphere. Truth, justice, goodness are still relevant for us today, and we still observe them as higher values. However, they are expressed, let's say, by secular means. Now, we all can say that we see truth, justice, and peace all around us. They are expressed by social programs, by NGOs, and also by politics. Now, keeping this in mind, I would like to introduce you another person, which is important for my reflection, and this is Carl Schmitt. And Carl Schmitt, another German philosopher, influential person, were investigating what's the role or the meaning of the metaphysical value in politics. And Schmitt, in his very influential work, Politische Theologie, more than 100 years ago, showed that the categories such as sovereignty, law, or power were originally religious and theological, and their meaning and authority were transferred to the secular political sphere. Now, this is very vital, and we may see that his thoughts are relevant. And Schmitt, although he's not explicit in this warning, his work is observed by modern intellectuals, by philosophers, as one big warning. As one big warning against the fact that the secularized concepts can continue to carry their original transcendent gravity, giving political decisions and almost religious authority. Now, there is a big danger of misuse of this authority, and we saw the misuses in the history in the times of the reign of Hitler, Stalin, and now Putin. Keeping all this in mind, I would like to point out that the world we live in understand or take politics as a power which is shaped by ideas of higher, more metaphysical, if you want, values, but it also shapes them. And the relevance of these metaphysical values are now proved or determined by their strength in politics or geopolitics. Now, having the metaphysical values not in the heavenly sphere, but moving them to the earth, to the immanental sphere, is something which is really characteristic for the world we live in, and it's very dangerous again. The relevance of the values that were religiously guaranteed by their anchoring in the transcendent sphere must now be proven and defended by their power in the immanent political arena. Keeping this in mind, I would like to introduce the problem or the issue. Now, both war and peace are political topics as well, and they have their political gravity. And as such, they also have their metaphysical dimension. And the problem is the unjust end of the war, so to say, unjust peace, undermines the relevance of the values that are sacred for us. Now, the role of justice, freedom, truth, dignity, and other values are undermined if the aggressor triumphs and if the goodness loss, if you want. We often are said that when the aggressor wins, when he triumphs, the power of law is replaced by the law of power. Now, what I want to say also, the metaphysics of justice is going to be replaced by the metaphysics of power, like Putin's Russia is trying to find, and the Russian church is trying to find, sanctifying the power of weapons and conquering other countries and cultures. Now, what is important for us and what I see as our obligation as theologians, philosophers, how to speak about the just peace in the condition when the just peace and the condition for just peace are not achieved. This is a problem, and this is a duty for us, I would say. And my proposal is to look to the Holy Scripture, to the Bible, and to find inspiration how to answer this question and how to address this issue. And I'm not going to give you a deep insight into the biblical theology, since I don't have space and time for that. Instead, I would like to show you a few very vital moments how peace is understood in the Bible. And first, let me start with the Old Testament and the Hebrew term shalom. And this term originally meant integrity, completeness, or the act of restoring things to their original state, their fullness. And as you can see, the semantics is really wide. It may mean prosperity, success, intactness, personal safety, welfare, friendliness, deliverance, salvation. It is also a peace. Yes, in the public sense, the opposite of war, but in a private sense as well, a calm state of affairs, tranquility. The most vital moment of the Old Testament shalom is that it represents the overall state of harmony, justice, the fullness of life that includes relationships with God, people, creation. Now there is a very famous pericope in the Bible, which I'm not going to read all, but it is a pledge of the Lord, who is promising His care for the people, obeying His commands, and it is not by chance that the central part is peace. His peace is safety from the enemies, from the wild beasts, but it's wider. It's not only about being safety. The God is promising the rich offspring, the rich harvest, and all these together is a peace promised to the peoples of God. Peace is a gift and promise from God. We can see this in Psalms and many other texts. It represents all good that comes from justice. This is a very important part. It's a product of justice. It can be achieved when justice is restored and righteousness reigns between man and God. It is a work of righteousness. However, there is no peace for the wicked, says the Lord. And last but not least, the shalom in the Old Testament means a fullness. It constitutes an eschatological category. We all know the famous vision of the prophet Isaiah, of the idealized relations between the creation, between man, between animals, between beasts. However, the same prophet is not remaining only theoretical. It is not a possibility, a chance somewhere, sometimes, someday it may happen. Now, here's a Prince of Peace, which is pledged to us, which is coming to us. Now, very shortly, the New Testament, more or less equivalent, Eirene in New Testament Greek, more or less corresponds to this Old Testament term. It is a state of concord, peace, harmony, state of well-being, peace, and which is now what is very important for the New Testament. The peace is achieved in Jesus Christ, of course, and completes and fulfills the concept of the shalom in the Old Testament. So that what is Jesus talking about in John's Gospel? John's Gospel, it is a pledge of all this harmony promised in the Old Testament. Also, it is a deep inner state of person, elaborated especially in Paul's letters. Paul brings this topic into the deeper anthropological level of the conqueror of the sin and being free. And of course, peace maintains a communal character that even develops into a universal. So the peace brings us into one body, and the message of God is translated is announced to the whole world, to the all nations, and then it even goes to the whole world, to the whole universe. And of course, it maintains an eschatological dimension as well. We know this from the book of Revelation, but not only. So, concluding my lecture, let me return or to get back to my question, how to speak about peace in the world in the conditions when just peace is a matter of future or a distant future. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking only about military peace in the military terms. Even if Russia's army is pushed away from Ukraine, there are still this state is still far away from the condition which could be called a just peace. There's a need for, yes, for reparation, but also a beg for a pardon. And the wounds of war are very deep. And achieving the state when we can speak about a just peace is really a matter of distant future. So how in this situation, how can we talk about peace? And how can we retain the meaning of peace? In the deeper meaning. How can we speak about peace without emptying the very term? There are 3 moments I think we can learn from the Holy Scripture. The first moment, we should keep the rich meaning of peace. We shouldn't narrow it into the absence of the conflict. We should understand peace not only as absence of conflict, but in a broader sense as the ideal of harmonious relations that can and should always be furthered and developed. Like a justice, for example. You wouldn't say there is a justice. There is a justice or there is no justice. The same way we should speak about peace. It is not either. There is a peace, there is no peace. There is always a space to develop the peace, to build the peace, and to bring it into a better condition, so to say. Now, the second point is very much close to the previous one. Peace must be seen as a consequence and development of justice. It is a product, and as well, peace should be founded upon justice. The phrase unjust peace should be understood as a contradiction. There's no peace forced by power, forced by political necessity. Peace is something which grows from the justice. And we can speak about truth, of course, but the state when one is forced to stop the military action is not peace in the right sense of the word. And last, I propose to understand peace not as a result of political will or necessity. Rather, instead, I would propose to understand politics as a means to implement peace, which should be understood as a general commitment. We should understand our doing, our political doing, as a way how to achieve some higher, bigger obligation to bring peace and to develop it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jiří. And I'm honored to introduce Father Dr. Joseph Jančovič. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Theology at Comenius University in Bratislava. He also is a principal investigator of the project A Paradigmatic Shift in the Understanding of War and Armed Conflicts from Theological, Historical, and Legal Perspective. Father Joseph traveled to Ukraine yesterday. Unfortunately, there were some issues that he had to return back to Bratislava. So I am very glad that he is able to present his report, but I guess he's tired from his road. But we are happy to have you, Father, among us, and the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I greet you from Bratislava, and I prepare for today for this conference biblical lecture of prophecy in Ezekiel 38-39, temporal dimension and role of space in war-oriented prophecy in Ezekiel 38-39. We know from the post-exile time that the Lord is a God who crashes words. We find this in Judith 1662, and I would like to offer also this lecture to the people who suffer from wars in whole the world, and especially in Ukraine. We read in Kohelet in Ecclesiasticus 31 and 8, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time for war and time for peace. And we hope in peace. And in Ezekiel 37:26, some verse before these two chapter 38-39, we heard from the Lord, I will make a covenant of peace with them. I shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their land and multiply them. We find several biblical texts which are causing the hope for just peace as a divine gift. My presentation has these points of outline: textual and redactional history of Ezekiel 38-39, because it's a little bit problematic. Then I say some words about context and structure of Ezekiel 38-39. Then about temporal dimension, I do you some modes, and at the end about the special terminology. In last year, we witnessed very great interest about these two chapters, Ezekiel 38-39. I prepare here some monographs which were published in last year. And first of all, this monograph from Tuman in 2011, and from Rosal 2012, and from Wojciech Pikor 2018. There is a problematic textual and redactional history of these two chapters. I say some words about that. Book of Ezekiel underwent a process of, in German, Fortschreibung, continual rewriting. There seems to be a consensus that the textual sequence witnessed by Papyrus 967 and some Dead Sea Scroll. This Papyrus 967 is 3rd century papyrus before Christ. It's a biblical Old Greek manuscript, and it was discovered in 1931, and it is important for early variants in Ezekiel and Daniel. We are interested, first of all, in Ezekiel. Originally, this papyrus had 59 sheets, which corresponds to 111 leaves, and or 236 pages. We can find in this papyrus the sequence of these chapters. After Ezekiel 36, verses 16 to 23, we find a block of two chapters, 38, 39. And then we find the text of vision in chapter 37. And at the end, the vision about the new temple, 40-48. This papyrus and this old Greek text represents an earlier edition than Masoretic text. But we have also other textual witnesses from some text of Ezekiel in Dead Sea Scrolls. For example, in Masada Ezekiel, we have this sequence of text like in our Masoretic text, we find chapter 37 before 38. And we have this sequence like in our Hebrew Bible. Then also this Dead Sea Scroll, Masada Ezekiel, because it was found in Masada, is earlier edition than Masoretic text. We can see that there is some fluidity in the textual history. The actual reconstruction of the redaction history of the two chapters seems to be a long way away. There are two basic options. The most recent monographs on Ezekiel 38 to 39 vote for a kind of block model, that is, chapter 38, 39 were inserted as a block, as like a thematic pastiche, and did not develop slowly out of a small core. And there is also other, Klein and Biberger, author, on the other hand, they attempt to reconstruct a multi-layer redaction history of both chapters. Also here, there is not consensus about redaction history. What is clear and what is sure is the final text. We can find it from the Masoretic text and we can read it. And we can find nice context of the two chapters 38, 39. Ezekiel 34 and 36 contain oracles that are interrupted in Ezekiel 37 because this is vision. In Ezekiel 37 we know this very nice vision of Wally, and in the verses 1 to 14 we can find this vision of hope, and later we can find the sign act in verses 15 to 28 in chapter 37. Then we can find in the blocks of chapter 38 and 39 the oracles. And they are followed at the end by vision in final chapters 40 and 48. When we read chapter 37, we can hear about this covenant of peace, about which I read before. It shall be everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary, Migdashi, in their midst forever. And my dwelling place, in verse 27, Mishkani shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary, again, Migdashi, is in their midst forever. Then we have these two chapters, 38 and 39, about God's word and final peace. And then in vision about new sanctuary, we hear again about the sanctuary, Migdash. This is new sanctuary. It is necessary to have the peace for this new liturgy. And we can go now to see these two chapters as a diptych. These two chapters with oracles in Ezekiel 38, 39 may be divided to two panels. Panel A, defeat of Gog, in verses 38 to 23. In first 9 verses we can find conscription of Gog, then the motifs of Gog in four other verses, 10 to 13. In 14 to 16, the advance of Gog in his war. And then in 17 to 22, the judgment of Gog. There is one verse as an interpretative conclusion. In second chapter, in chapter 39, we see the disposal of Gog. In verses 1 to 8, we heard about the slaughter of God. Then in 9 to 10, the plundering of God. in 11 to 16, the burial of Gog, and in 17 to 20, the devouring of Gog. There is 8 verses as an interpretative conclusion. This is the final words at the end of these 2 chapters. We can find conventional formulas in these 2 chapters. This is very clear because the text of Ezekiel is very homogeneous. The rhetoric structure of Gog oracle is complex due to the recurrence of numerous conventional formulas employed in the prophetic communication, which make it possible to delimit small rhetorical units. We can find the commission formula, the messenger formula in this text. We can find again and again the expression Son of Man used as an introductory position. We can find this formula Neum Adonai Elohim in some places, and then we can find also this divine recognition formula in its variants. This is very clear also in these 2 chapters. Now we can say some words about this interesting temporal indication. The invasion of Gog and his allies of the land of Israel is to take place on that day, Bayom Hahu, as emphasized in Ezekiel 38:10, 14, 18, 19, and in 39:11. This day will constitute a caesura in Israel history, for it is from that day onward, min hayom hahu hala, in Ezekiel 39:22, that Israel will live safely in their land. The foretold day belongs to the future, specified in Ezekiel 38:8 as after many days, miyamim rabim, and in the later days, ba'charit hashanim, and in Ezekiel 38:16 we hear about in the later days, ba'charit hayamim. Are these predictions of time? Are predictions of the end in a relative sense, which means denoting a specific period in future, or in an absolute way? It means as the end of history? There are different answers. Exegetes answer this question on the basis of the analysis of the 14 occurrences of expression ba'acharit hayamim in the later days. Originally, the term referred to the limited period in time in future. We can see these verses, which in Isaiah and in Micah 4:1, in Hosea 3:5, is situated at the border of current historical time and the end of time. But in Daniel 2:28 and Daniel 10:14, it is a technical term to denote the end of time. Big commentator of Ezekiel, Walter Zimmerli, and other one, Daniel Block, do not see the expression as an abstract concept of time, as an empty entity to be filled with events. Neither does he speak of an absolute end. It indicates the end of specific period in the distant future, which nevertheless falls with current historical time. It is idiomatic expression, according to Zimmerli, denoting a substantial period of time in the future. Gog's attack is a different even than the day of Yahweh. We can hear about the day of Yahweh, even if semantically it alludes to the idea of the day of Yahweh as presented in the book of Ezekiel. The prophet does not specify the duration of the period referred to as after many days, in the later days and days that will end with Gog's invasion. The Gog oracle introduces a completely new temporal perspective in Israel history, not invoked by Ezekiel so far. The Israelites have already returned from the Babylonian exile and live safely in their land, which proves that the relationship of the covenant with Yahweh has been rebuilt. The history of the chosen nation will be completed with Yahweh's annihilation of Gog, which on the one hand will prove God's might and holiness for all the nations to see, and on the other will bring about a definite salvation of Israel. In this way, the Gog oracle transcends historical time. For the restoration of Israel, a chronological reference point to Gog's invasion has not yet happened. Introducing the new stage of future events, the prophet nevertheless does not stress the end of history. As the conclusion of Gog oracle in 39:22 indicates, history will continue. At the same time, the conclusion of the Gog prophecy returns to the prophets and his listeners, now, Atah, during which Yahweh will change their faith. Ezekiel then offers a typology in these oracles, in which Yahweh's triumph over Gog, situated in some distant, unspecified future, constitutes a confirmation of the salvation promised for the land of Israel, which is to happen in the near, precisely delineated future. In this way, we can say the restoration of the land of Israel seems a turning point not only in the history of the chosen nation, but, this is very important, also in the history of all the other nations that will acknowledge Yahweh's sanctity. And this is also possible for other nations which suffer, and they can live in peace in future when they acknowledge Yahweh's sanctity. And we can say now some words about the special terminology in ancient Near East, because we can find it also here in these two chapters. Broadly speaking, spatial orientation in ancient Near East can be plotted along two axes, horizontally and vertically. This is very clear. On horizontal plane, the basic orientation is towards the east. In front is east for Oriental Israelite. Behind is west, right is south, left is north. On the horizontal plane, far and near became key concepts. To be far is negative, to be near is positive. To east-west orientation represents the temporal dimension. A person literally moves backwards toward the future, with the past receding in the front of him or her. As the past becomes more remote, it becomes the realm of myth, providing patterns for present belief and behavior. The south-north orientation, also in biblical text, represents sometimes the moral dimension. Right, south, is associated with good, and left, north, with danger. We can see it also in the Gog's oracles. Proximity to the self as center implies reality, commonly expressed as holiness. Temples, homes for gods in ancient Near East, modeled on human houses, are places of reality and therefore of sacredness. Distance from the self means a progressive approach to the end of world, where reality breaks down. On a vertical plane, we spoke before about horizontal plane. Now, on the vertical plane, the universe as imagined by the people of ancient Near East is geocentric and consists of three basic building blocks: heaven, earth, and netherworld. Heaven is the realm of the gods, earth is meant for humans, while the netherworld is an entirely negative space, the realm of the dead. Earth generally lies as a flat plate lying horizontally at the center of great sphere. Outside this sphere, above, below, and around, lies the cosmic ocean. On the vertical plane, the key concepts are up and down. To ascend is good, entering the realm of gods, and making contact with them. To descend is bad, entering the realm of the netherworld, cutting off any possibility of contact with the divine sphere. The intersection between the horizontal and vertical axis, the cosmic center of the universe, is to be found, usually taught as a mountain. We can see it in the mountain of Zion, for example, in Jerusalem. There the temple of the high God stands, right at the intersection of the horizontal and vertical planes. Thus it becomes the center of the universe, the most sacred space, the meeting point of the divine and human spheres. It is especially the covenantal community who experiences the temple at Jerusalem as its special center. On the vertical plane, to be at the temple implies to be in harmony with the Lord, and to be away from the temple means to be out of harmony with Yahweh. A special dimension of the revival of the land of Israel in Ezekiel 38-39 we can find in proper names of the places, toponyms, verbs and proposition and direction. Besides basic significance of space as a container for existence and location for events, space functions in the text as an organizing structure and marker of subjectivity. Concept of space, that means the three-dimensional and materially delimited space with facultative material manifestation of its borders, in which it is possible to clearly distinguish between its inside and outside. And there are also places, particular points in a space. Space may carry a poetic, metaphoric, symbolic, or thematic meaning. We can find it in the meaning of north in these two chapters, Ezekiel 38-39, where the north is dangerous place and a place of enemies. Basic concept of space for the biblical text, it means narrative space, space as surrounding of the characters in a literal sense. We can see narrative space in this view, space as surrounding of characters in a literal sense. Now we can ask about Gog, because he's from Magog, and we can say some words about his meaning and identity. Gog is leader of northern peoples, Meshech and Tubal, and other one we can see in chapter 38. Gog comes from Sumerian Gug. This word means death, enmity, hostility. Gog in Ezekiel can be as a cipher for Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. Anya Klein deserves the credit for observing the Gog oracle's lexical links to not only Ezekiel 25:32, but also Ezekiel 23. Gog bears the attributes of not only the Babylonians, but also the Assyrians and the Egyptians. We can say at the end, the Gog is a cipher for evil darkness of the north and personifies the powers hostile to the Lord. When we see the map of these names in these two chapters, we can find 8 nations from the north, but actually they are not all from north, because we can see in these two maps that Magog is in north, Meshech and Tubal also, but in Septuagint we can find also the Ros. This is from Hebraic Rosh, and this is the reason why some new commentators see in this chapter 38 also Russia as the variant for Ros, but it's only, but this word Ros in Greek is a verbal translation of Rosh, which means head. Then we can find, except that Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, Put, Gomer, Tomarga. And in verses 13, we can see also other nations, Sheba, Dedan, and Tarshish. these are not really from north. But in symbolic way, these 8 nations are all orientated to north. In Masoretic text, we can find at the end 11 nations, but in Septuagint with this Ros, 12 nations, which will be collected and united in Israel, and they guided under guide of Gog to Israel. We can see the different orientation and different direction, and you can see that really the north is symbolical place and is the cipher of the enmity of the nations against Israel. You can see the Tarshish is from west, Sheba and Dedan is from south, Cush from Africa from south, Put is Libya from west also, Persia is from east. Then we can see in this spatial dimension very interesting symbolism. The identification of Gog we spoke is very symbolical, and he is guide of these all nations, and the number of these nations supporting Gog shows the meta-historical power of evil. We can see his cosmic dimensions of this evil. Yahweh's defeat of Gog is not a local event, even if it takes place upon the mountains of Israel. This is other location, mountain of Israel. Yahweh uses a great earthquake, and we can see all this nation as a storm and cloud in verse 9 and 16 in chapter 38. You can see them moving from up from God, because God guided Gog with all this nation, and they are for Israel as a storm and cloud. They came to Israel because of Lord from up, yeah, and the land was restored from sword, from war. The land Israel is after war. Land was whose people were gathered from peoples. They are again in their land of Israel from exile, and they are living upon the mountains of Israel. We can see in chapter 39, verse 2, the fire from God. This is other element, which is typical theophanic element. The fire is also from God, from up, and is going to the upon the mountains of Israel for disposal of Gog. In chapter 38, we can continue with all these verses, and we can see that big earthquake, Raj Gadol, in 38:19, is a tool to punish the invader, all this nation. In later prophetic texts, this expression will function as a technical term to describe the world's return to the original cause. The earthquake's epicenter is in the land of Israel, and we can see the land of Israel as the center of the world. God's victory over Gog is observed by the whole world, including animals. The description of feast of the body of Gog's soldier, to which Yahweh invites the birds of every kind and all the wild animals, is astonishing anthropomorphism in a text rooted in the priestly tradition. We can now maybe finish this presentation with some words that we can find these world languages became an effective form of resistance in this chapter. Concept of Lord's War was adopted into biblical writing from the people of ancient Near East with its norms, and was partially civilized compared to the other nation. After exile, we can find the Lord is a God who crushes swords. And I see in this text, in these two chapters, a typology for suffering nations, that the Lord God will deal in his own way with the aggressors at the appropriate place and time. We are expected to have confidence and holiness and morality in acting. Thank you for your attention.
Dear Father Joseph, thank you very much for beautiful presentation. It's like a song for my biblical ears, but sometimes we need to be passionate to make a bridge for our situation in Ukraine. But your conclusion, I guess, was very, I would say, reasonable for the situation we live in. Recently, our politologist and journalist Portnikov said that some people can put themselves in the place of God, but they have to remember that God will judge at the end all human deeds. Sometimes people, when they have power, they are forgetting about this. Once again, thank you very much, and I'm pleased to introduce our long-lasting partner and colleague, Professor Dr. Helen Zorgdrager. She's a professor at Protestant Theological University in Utrecht. We have a long tradition of cooperation with PTHU, and what is the most important is that Professor Zorgdrager visits Ukraine maybe more than all other our partners a couple times in a year. She is a very courageous woman. She has very dedicated heart to Ukraine, to suffering people. He helps a lot of, and he promotes our agenda around the globe, especially in Western Europe. We are grateful for this, Professor Helen. And Professor Zorgdrager will present today a report, Care as the Heart of Justice, Reflections on Justice in the Context of the Russia-Ukrainian War. Helen, floor is yours.
In my paper, I will share some reflections on the notions of justice as a contribution to the question, what is or shall be just peace in Ukraine? How do we understand just and justice from a theological perspective? And what makes a just peace? On which moral principles and foundations should it be built? My reflections are partly inspired by voices from the Reformed tradition and partly by the ethics of care strand in contemporary moral reasoning. The latter intends to be a correction to a noted one-sidedness of the ethics of justice, and invokes a process of reconceptualizing key concepts such as just war and just peace. I will hint at some possibilities to bring those theoretical inputs in an engaged and critical dialogue with the letter of the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine on war and just peace in the context of new ideologies of February 2024. So let's start with Reformed voices. The World Communion of Reformed Churches. Justification by faith is a core concept in Protestant tradition, as you know, though it is not its exclusive possession. In 1999, the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification was signed by the Catholic Church and the Lutheran World Federation, which was celebrated as a true ecumenical landmark. In 2017, the World Communion of Reformed Churches affirmed its doctrinal agreement with these common statements on the doctrine of justification. Interestingly, the Reformed had some particular emphasis and additional insights to bring when they associated with the agreement. The main one was the intrinsic relation the Reformed see between justification and doing justice, between justice as a central characteristic of the sovereign God and the human work for justice. In their association document, they explained that for the Reformed, justice is not simply the ethical outworking of justification as a kind of second step. Rather, it is already entailed theologically in justification as such. In God's saving work, things are being set right in lives. We, as humans, are drawn into right relationship with God and in the true worship of God. This true worship finds concrete manifestation in our striving for justice in society. The faithful are called to join in God's world-transforming work of setting right the disordered, oppressive relations in the world and to defend the poor and powerless. What could this typical Reformed emphasis on acting just as entailed in the gift of justification bring to the theological understanding of justice in the context of war? I think for any theology of justice, it is imperative to be anchored in the heart of the matter, in a doctrine of God. Calvin started from the sovereignty and justice of God, who, in justifying us through the mediating work of Jesus Christ and adopting us in the Spirit as his very own children, draws us into his life-affirming and world-embracing work of setting right what has gone awfully wrong. Confessing God in war then implies embodying this work of justice, defending the poor and powerless, and setting things right, so that the evildoers are prevented from further destroying human life and dignity, including their own. I think this resonates well with the prophetic and divine call written large above the letter of the Synod of Bishops of February this year. The motto is, "Rescue the victims from the hand of their oppressors." Jeremiah 22, verse 3. And with the claim in the letter, in one echoed with liberation theologians, that the Church always has to make a preferential option for the offended, those who suffer from brutal violence and injustice. I go to the Reformed voice number 2, Nicholas Wolterstorff. Nicholas Wolterstorff is an American philosopher in the Reformed tradition. He has developed the theory of justice over against two rival ideas. First, he proposes that justice is not primarily a matter of obeying an order of obligations and duties. This is the so-called right order approach. But justice is about honoring inherent rights, which is the rights approach, understood as one's legitimate claim to be treated in a way as benefits one's worth. It is a theistic approach of justice. According to Wolterstorff, God bestows this worth on and in human beings. Justice as honoring inherent human rights is for Wolterstorff not an invention of the Enlightenment, but it is already included in the Bible and in the Church Fathers. Second, Wolterstorff argues that justice is not to be contrasted with love, but is rather an example of love. A theologian like Stanley Hauerwas maintains that love, God's agape, is central to the New Testament and it would supersede justice. Hauerwas refers to forgiveness as an undeserved generosity out of love. Wolterstorff counterclaims that the imperatives of doing justice and loving your neighbor should be kept together. And thus, the Old and New Testament talk on justice and love should be kept together. Both recognize inherent worth and inherent rights of human beings. Justice is aimed at honoring this worth and these rights. Love cannot be justice blind. Love and justice need to be balanced. Forgiveness for Wolterstorff is not beyond the rights spectrum. It presupposes that someone's worth and rights have been violated and are, morally speaking, in need of restoration. Doing justice to our neighbor is a specimen of love. Both justice and love seek to promote the well-being of the other. Loving benevolently and justly finds expression in caring about the neighbor. The Sermon on the Mount of Jesus radicalizes this in calling us to love the wrongdoer, the enemy. Jesus rejects the reciprocity code that prescribes return evil with evil. So how to act in the face of real existing evil, as the letter of the bishops so aptly states, the evil is real, we have seen its face. Wolterstorff offers the following principle of application, and I quote, "One should never seek to impose some evil on someone, diminish the person's flourishing as an end in itself. One should seek to impose some evil only if doing so is an indispensable means to promoting greater goods in the life of that person and or of others. Only if one should be promoting those greater life goods and never at the cost of wronging someone." End of quote. This moral principle, I think, does allow for a legitimate self-defense of a country against military aggression and for the solidarity and support with that country. It resonates with how the letter of bishops argues based on the Catholic teaching. For legitimate defense to be just, this defense always has a clearly limited goal, a just peace, not the complete destruction of the enemy's people, economy, or political institutions. And the purpose of legitimate defense of one's own people and statehood is to ensure a just peace for all parties, so that revenge, conquest, economic gain, and subjugation are unacceptable. So just peace as the greater good that should be strived for includes, according to the letter of the bishops, to take measures that future proper relations between Ukraine and Russia will be possible, as well as healing the wounds caused by war, done by measures as the disclosure of truth, persecution of the criminal actors, political apologies of the enemy, etc. From the side of Wolterstorff, additionally, the question would arise whether the promotion of greater goods in the life of others, in this case Russia, the Russians, as the ultimate end, also could be described in more positive terms. What could Russia gain from a just peace? I move now to the care ethical perspectives on justice. In the 1980s, feminist scholars developed an ethics of care as a critical alternative to the ethics of justice. In the classical ethics of justice, ethical decisions are made on the basis of universal principles and rules, and in an impartial and verifiable manner with a view to ensuring the fair and equitable treatment of all people. It bases on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, who defined justice as the balancing of conflicts between the potentially conflicting freedom rights of individuals. The view of autonomous personhood is constitutive in such an ethics of justice. Alternatively, the ethics of care centers on involvement, relationships, empathy, responsibility, a relational ontology. Responding to the needs of others play an important role. Significant names for developing this strand of ethical theory are Carol Gilligan in the 1980s and Joan Tronto in the 1990s. Whereas Gilligan embedded the ethics of care in mothering, caring, and nurturing practices and experiences of women, Joan Tronto redefined care as a broad practice within a political context, without falling into the trap of re-invoking essentialist notions of motherhood. Tronto firmly established care's importance as both a moral and political concept, defined as a human specious activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environments, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web. In feminist ethics of war and peace, insights from care ethics are applied and made fruitful. For some feminist scholars and activists, this leads to a principled pacifist position, arguing that non-violence would be inherent to women's political and social agency. More interesting and relevant, given the current realities of Russia's war against Ukraine, and less dogmatic, to my view, are those scholars who do not go along with this pacifism, but critique and revise just war theory from notions of ethics of care, or who focus on an alternative approach based on the ethics of care. Their insights can be made productive in enriching both the concepts of just war and just peace. Anna Höglund has been revising just war theory. She states that the concept of justice, rooted in the formal approach of Kant, cannot account for all relational and experiential aspects that are present in real contexts of war. Also, the neat distinction between combatants and non-combatants is untenable from the point of view of women and others who suffer in war. Women's war has a different face, as Svetlana Alexeyevich rightly posed, and is not sufficiently accounted for in just war theories. Höglund grounds her ethics of justice on narratives, real-life stories, and experiences of women who have undergone great injustices, such as rape in war. A narrative ethics of justice, she holds, must be based in concrete, situated, gendered people's experiences of getting their human rights violated. Höglund suggests that values of care can be integrated into an ethics of justice. Embodied experiences and a multitude of stories should be prioritized in making ethical judgments on war, in war and after war. Just war theory is thus corrected by adding care ethical values to the framework. Gillian Ann Terry believes that a step more needs to be made outside of the paradigm of just war theory. She presents an ethical framework based on values of care that can help us to better understand and handle the moral dilemmas characteristic of contemporary warfare, as we see it today in Ukraine and in the Middle East. She refers to the increasing technologization by using unmanned combat aerial vehicles, drone warfare, the growing influence of private military contracting, like ISIS or Prigozhin's Wagner, hybrid warfare and counterinsurgency based on artificial intelligence. She says we need a less abstract approach. Rather than constructing a set of rules or principles by which to judge the ethics of war, the ethics in war, we need a framework that allows to evaluate in a more flexible way and that does justice to the complexity of current warfare and its moral dilemmas. She bases her explicitly care ethical framework on the key notions relationality, experience, empathy, and responsibility. And she explains, this framework is not meant to act as a set of concrete moral principles to be universally applied to cases in order to decide whether or not they are ethical. Rather, constructing a feminist ethics grounded on these four pillars allows us to make judgments about the moral and ethical status of warfare practices in a way that is context-dependent, flexible, and reflexive. These ethical claims are therefore understood to be constantly subject to change and reconfirmation, distinguishing themselves from claims of justice that are often articulated in the just war tradition. I end with some evaluative remarks. Although I see the strength of the letter proposal of Gillian Terry, and I see that it enables to reflect ethically in complex situations of war and conflict, I nevertheless consider a care ethical framework not entirely adequate, especially confronted with the moral task of jus ad bellum, so the justification of a defensive war, and jus post bellum, the just peace. I would suggest that from a Christian perspective, we cannot let go the claim of universal principles of justice, as expressed in the more classical ethics of justice. One can assume an ethic of responsibility, relationship, care, and community, while retaining the values typical of an ethic of justice, autonomy, critical reflection, and universality of moral concern. Distributive justice, procedural justice, which is determining how people are fairly treated, retributive justice, based on punishment of the wrongdoers, and restorative justice, which tries to restore relationships to rightness, should be kept in an ethics of war and peace, possibly to a maximum embedded in a care ethical approach of relationality and responsibility. While these types of justice are sufficiently met by the letter of bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, I see that the care ethical attention for the agencies and experiences of women in the war is lacking. Women appear in the letter only marginally, together with children and the elderly, as passive objects whose lives must be defended by the courageous military. Whereas women are active in all sectors of the military and civil defense of the country. With women, also gender disappears from the analysis of the war in the letter. The Russian ideology is profoundly criticized, but leaving out the role of gender. This is all the more striking since, as Petr Kratochvil and Mila O'Sullivan stated, gender has been central to every aspect of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, from the preparatory discursive practices and its justification on the grounds of protecting traditional values to the genocidal violence committed on Ukrainians. I can only wonder why the bishops omitted this important element from their appealing and urgent letter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Zrogdrager, for your beautiful presentation. And as we move forward, I am pleased to introduce with a report Reverend Dr. Oleg Kindi, who is currently Professor of the Department of Theology on our Faculty of Philosophy and Theology, which will present the report with the title "The Concept of Just Peace in the Letter of Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine on War and Just Peace in the Context of New Ideologies, Rescue the Victims from the Land of Their Oppressors." This document, which appeared almost 1 year ago, was translated into 6 languages, and there were many good reviews of this document, which is, I guess, one of the most important documents, which was, as Professor Jerry Bayer said, created by the religious representatives because of its very complicated issues. And I'm very grateful that Father Oleg in recent years published his analysis of all Catholic documents related to the war and just peace. And now his analysis, this is what we are waiting for. Father, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure being here. And I'm happy to follow the speech by our colleague Helen. I will not be the apologetics for this document, but I would like to outline the strong sides of the document. But let me contextualize it in a historical perspective. Since the beginning of the unjust, unprovoked, and full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation on December 22nd, 2022, various churches and religious organizations in Ukraine have been actively involved in collecting and providing humanitarian aid to refugees, displaced persons, and all those affected by the war, and have also increased their number of military chaplains to provide spiritual support to Ukrainian soldiers. But in addition to material and spiritual support, various churches have also begun to form and convey to Ukrainian society and to the international community their vision of the causes, the root causes and consequences of this war. One of the earliest strong and clear statements were made, surprisingly, by the Council of the Protestant Churches of Europe, CPCE in Strasbourg, on March 18, 2022. In it, the authors invited all people of the goodwill to pray for Ukraine, condemned the full-scale invasion as unprovoked and unjust, and called the whole civilized world to provide humanitarian, financial, and moral support to millions of Ukrainians who had to flee to the outside of the country or to be displaced within Ukrainian lands. There are also short statements by the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Father Francis, who also called this war unjust and unprovoked. A short but also definitive was the statement of the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, who in May 2022 expressed his thought that for his support of the Putin's war on Ukraine, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow should renounce the title of Patriarch. And I quote the Patriarch Bartholomew, because what is happening is not in the spirit of the gospel. But to return to the context of the Catholic Church of the 20th century, it has furthered her understanding of the tragedy of war with many new important arguments and provisions. Let's not forget that in 1937, even before the World War II, the world saw the encyclical, a very important document by Pope Pius XI, Mit Brennerger Sorge, by the way, written in German, not in Latin, and it was usually the case, issued during the Nazi era, condemning Nazi ideology. Later, in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, Pope John XXIII issued his famous encyclical Pacem in Terris, which even today is one of the most cited documents on the question of war and peace. With the new reality of the weapons of mass destruction, in particular nuclear weapons, how can we still speak of any war to be just? He says, paragraph 111, while it is difficult to believe that anyone would dare to assume responsibility for initiating the appalling slaughter and destruction that war would bring in its wake, there is no denying that the conflagration could be started by some chance and unforeseen circumstances. Moreover, even though the monstrous power of modern weapons does indeed act as a deterrent, there is reason to fear that the very testing of nuclear devices for war purposes can, if continued, lead to serious danger for various forms of life on Earth. In 1983, this is a very peculiar year where there were high tensions between the United States and USSR. I don't want to go into details, but there were tens of different letters from the local bishops' conferences of the Catholic Church, German Democratic Republic, the Catholic bishops of Japan, of course, the bishops of the United States, issued many different approaches of what to do in this context. Why am I mentioning these documents of 1983? There was another one in 1993 by the American bishops, Harvest of Justice, as Sown in Peace, because I'm flabbergasted how active and courageous was the Catholic Church in the previous century and how silent in her theological assessment of the current global challenges she is today. I don't want to undermine Pope Francis's Laudato Si or Tutti Fratelli, which partially addresses the issue of the global economic and ecological inequality. But the 3 years of war in Ukraine seem to have fallen out of the attention of the theologians and Catholic bishops around the world. Even though the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian war in food security, energy stability, vast destruction of the environment, collapse of international law, and humanitarian crisis have long gone beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia. Yet there is an exception, namely within Ukraine. In particular, Ukraine Greek Catholic Church has published several of her letters and addresses in which she explains how the Christian tradition answered the questions of what true patriotism is, how a Christian should behave in army or in the rear, and what is the role of the church in the context of military escalation. I will just mention their titles. I will not go into detail of describing what they wrote, but it's worth reading them. In July 15th, 2022, the Synod of Bishops issued a pastoral letter, Resist Evil and Conquer It with Good, referring to Romans 12:21. On the 5th of December 2022, the second letter of the first year of the war, pastoral message of the Synod of Bishops in Ukraine on patriotism as love for one's own people and homeland. And it distinguishes between the true patriotism and the false or pagan patriotism. October 2023, I will not desert you, referring to the Hebrews 13:5. The issue of a just peace appeared several times in these epistles, but only in the last epistle, and thank you, Helen, that you already brought up some of the aspects of this letter. They really developed and described. So this letter provides a broader historical context for the current Russian-Ukrainian war, the roots of which go back to the unfinished civilizational conflict after World War II between totalitarian regimes and democratic societies. The world community clearly condemned one misanthropic ideology of German Nazism, but did not condemn another misanthropic ideology at all, namely of the Soviet one, which also caused the death and violation of dignity and rights of millions of peoples of many nations. Let me cite paragraph 6. As a result of the Second World War, one of the two main totalitarian monsters of the 20th century, National Socialist Germany was defeated. The Nazi totalitarian ideology and its crimes were put on trial in Nuremberg. In the decades that followed, West Germany went through a difficult and painful process of purification and became a democratic state. By contrast, the second totalitarian monster, the Soviet Union, with communist Russia at its core, was not only not destroyed, but also appeared before the world among the victors of the war, even claiming to be the main liberator from Nazism. Therefore, one of the 4 judges of the Nuremberg tribunal was a representative of the Soviet Union, even though the crimes of the communist rulers were no less or even greater than those of the leaders of Nazi Germany. So, after 1945, the USSR even expanded its geographical sphere of influence and conquered the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, creating satellite regimes in them and founding the Eastern Bloc of communist states, which opposed the countries of the free world. It took more than 40 years of the Cold War for the communists and atheist Soviet Union to reach complete ideological, economic, and social decline and eventually cease to exist. In paragraph 7, bishops write, it is worth mentioning that it was the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that was criminally banned by the communist rulers after World War II. Besides Ukrainian Greek Catholics, also other churches, Protestant churches, Ukrainian Orthodox Church was also persecuted. But the UGCC also was persecuted and kept underground throughout the Soviet period. That became one of the most important forces for change in Ukraine. The struggle for the legalization of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in 1989 and 1991 was an important contribution to the destruction of the Soviet atheist empire. And after independence, the faithful of the Church tried spiritually to support the new nation state and were consistent supporters of its renunciation of totalitarian communist past. A significant error of the free world after the collapse of the communist bloc was that democratic countries did not demand post-Soviet Russia, which was recognized as a successor to the Soviet Union, condemned fully the crimes of the communist period and required the new Russian rulers to ensure decommunization, lustration, and purification of their state from the consequences of totalitarianism. Nothing similar to what happened in Germany after World War II was done in Russia. According to the bishops of UGC, the new Russian tyranny of the 21st century is similar to the totalitarianism of the 20th century, primarily because it is a ruthless enemy of human freedom and dignity. At first glance, modern Russian tyranny seems to be less cruel and totalitarian than communist and National Socialist totalitarianism. In fact, it transforms the totalitarian features of the past into much more insidious and therefore even more dangerous forms that can be called hybrid. It is propaganda for nihilism in its worst forms, and its goals is the moral corruption of man, his dehumanization in order to make him weak-willed, indifferent to moral values, a tool for crimes against humanity. It seeks to undermine faith in any moral principles and tempts its subjects with the opportunity to commit violence against others with impunity. It claims that the whole world is governed only by brutal force, deception, and self-interest, putting forward various conspiratorial theories of a global plot against Russia. It uses them to justify any crimes committed by the Russian government against other nations. The digital revolution, to some extent, helps Russian propaganda to create a different virtual reality that is radically different from actual reality. And it is what is more, distorts it with its particular actions, production of fakes and postulation of post-truth. Modern Russian propaganda makes use of some of the most radical movements of philosophical postmodernism from the end of the last century, which denied the existence of objective and verifiable truth and claimed that there are no natural foundations of morality and law. One reality that people in the West also fail to observe is the emergence of the justification of war from a religious perspective. The Russian Orthodox Church has a long, one might say, even centuries-long tradition of serving the Russian government in its various, sometimes opposing historical forms, from the Orthodox rulers of the Tsardom of Moscow and the Russian Empire to the atheistic and communist Soviet Union. In all these configurations of the state, the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church sought to be in unity with the political authorities and benefit from a privileged position. Therefore, it should not be surprising that the Patriarch of Moscow supported and blessed Russia's criminal war against the Ukrainian people. Such actions are in line with the Muscovite tradition of the Church's ideological service to the authorities and its servility to those in power. Unfortunately, now this long-standing imperial tradition, combined with modern post-communist totalitarianism, has led to a real crime committed by the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate, namely to propagandizing the war. It was this church leadership that generated the new genocidal ideology, now known as the Russian world. Father Yuri Shurko referred to it, and willingly offered its services to the criminal authorities and sanctified, justified them. For many years, Ukrainian society has been trying to convey to the international community that a new aggressive ideology is emerging in Russia, a mixture of resentment, nationalism, and pseudo-religious messianism. During the entire period preceding the war, however, no one heard Ukrainians. This ideology, which the Russian authority named the Russian world, was established in Russia as the official and only correct ideology, and the role of the Moscow Patriarchate in creating and promoting this ideology is now well known as undeniable. It is the Russian Orthodox Church that has given the Russian world ideology a quasi-religious spirit in portraying Russia as the last bastion of Christianity and traditional values on earth that resist the evil forces. At the same time, the Russian Orthodox Church confers an almost sacred status of the deadliest nuclear weapons on earth. It is important for Christians around the world to understand that the doctrine of the Russian world has been condemned by numerous representatives of the Orthodox community itself, in particular a group of nearly 350 Orthodox theologians called it a heresy and a vile and undefensible teaching. According to these theologians, the basis of the Russian world ideology is the false doctrine of ethnophilitism, the love of one's nation above Christ and gospel. I mentioned the position of Patriarch Bartholomew already at the beginning of my presentation. This quasi-Christian doctrine degraded into full-fledged ideology of Russianism, which I could prove also that it has also elements of racism, because Russians present themselves as the higher nation in the world, and everyone else is a second class, so to say. So this racism, this Russianism, with the cult of the ruler and the dead and mythologized past, fascism's inherent corporativism, total censorship, conspiracy theories, centralized propaganda, and a war to destroy another nation. The impression is given that this Russianism has combined all previous ideological constructs, beginning from the Tsardom of Moscow with its messianic ideas of Holy Rus and the Third Rome, and the USSR with its aggressive imperialism and desire of global domination. After analyzing the root causes of this war, these documents also list examples from Ukraine's history of the various ways of Ukrainians responded to wars in the past. One of them was nonviolent resistance, which was exercised by Princes Boris and Gleb, who refused to engage in dynastic struggle and defend themselves by violent means. However, Ukraine has also the right for its defensive war and legitimate defense. And more on this I can read in paragraphs 33-40. In the 5th chapter, the document addresses the issue of neutrality in time of war and shows examples in the recent history how this neutrality becomes a passive approval of injustice and crimes, and therefore it is a moral imperative to oppose unjust aggression against any country and to defend the values upon which the international community is based. Chapter 6, I'll need to jump into my conclusions because I'm running out of time, emphasizes that the global legitimate defense is a just peace. What is a just peace? In Christian ethics, a just peace means more than simply victory over aggression. Paragraph 50. Paragraph 51. Ukrainians, of course, want the war to end as soon as possible, a long-awaited peace to come. St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas believed that the goal of a just war is a just peace. Pope Paul VI reiterated this thesis on the Day of Peace in 1972. The end of war would not be true peace if it means the end of Ukraine. A just peace can be neither the appeasement of the aggressor nor so-called minimal peace that implies recognition of the territories occupied by the aggressor. A just peace must be a long-standing, stable, with the restoration of the principles of international law. It involves not only the aggressor's defeat and restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, but also includes measures aimed at restoring proper relations between Ukraine, Russia, and the rest of the world, as well as healing the wounds caused by the war. The closure of truth and identification of criminal actors, international criminal courts, reparations, political apologies, forgiveness, memorials, new constitutions, and local reconciliation forums. In order to achieve a just peace in Ukraine, Christian churches, international organizations, and political institutions must be able to use very clear language to condemn Russia's military aggression and genocidal acts against Ukraine, and to ensure that war criminals are prosecuted. Unpunished evil continues to cause still more damage. The document concludes that Ukraine has become a center of global change and is facing terrible challenges today. The evil is real. We have seen its face. The voices of the innocently murdered, ruthlessly tortured, brutally raped, and forcibly deported are calling out to the world's conscience. Ukrainians do not question the importance of soberly weighing threats and carefully calibrating political steps. It is equally important, however, to maintain the ability to look at current events through the eyes of the victim. By launching a hybrid war against Ukraine, Russia has in fact challenged the entire civilized world. All of this can be overcome only by a clear and distinct proclamation of the truth of the gospel. If modern humanity, the humanity of the post-truth era, does not recognize objective truth, it will gradually turn into post-justice world. If it doesn't develop and establish social justice upon the basic principles of human dignity, the sanctity and inviolability of human life, the common good, solidarity, humanity will end up in societies where the concept of law is replaced by the concept of interests, be they of particular individuals or maleficent groups. In such societies, the right of the strong prevails over the rule of law. The law is not the same for everyone, and the foundations of international law and the inviolability of state sovereignty fall victim to contemporary world powers, geopolitical and economic interest. In fact, yes, this is perhaps so far a lonely voice, but I do hope that with the new realities that we're facing at the end of this year, perhaps beginning of the new year, not only on the political level but also on the level of Catholic churches, bishops around the world, there will be a new solidarity, support, and just peace in Ukraine. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Dear Father Alex, thank you very much for your brilliant analysis. When we have just one clear voice presented in one document of one Christian denomination, it sounds strange as for our times, but it's the reality we live in. We have slight changes in our program due to the health issues. Professor Dr. Johannes Freubauer cannot attend this conference today, so I am honored to introduce Professor Dr. Jeffrey Dirk Wilson, who is a research associate professor at the Catholic University of America. Dr. Jeffrey Dirk Wilson is a scholar specializing in classical metaphysics, ancient Greek philosophy, and political thought, with a focus on Homer's philosophical influence. And currently he resides on his family farm in Maryland, where he continues his philosophical work as a Neoplatonic Thomist, and today he will present his report entitled The Theology of the Nationhood. Professor Wilson, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be part of this international conference. What does it mean to be a country in the 21st century? What is Ukraine? And what is just peace? I shall argue that a just peace is only possible in terms of friendship. The current state of affairs. We live in a post-ideological age. We live in the convergence of the parallel lines of Adam Smith's capitalism and Karl Marx's communism. Little remains of the belief systems underlying those two great ideologies, and we are left with the human being as mere economic animal. Aristotle is my philosophical light. He conceived the human being as political animal and as the animal possessing reason. In today's human being, politics has been replaced by economics, and rationality has been replaced by irrationality. There has been a kind of second fall. What I propose is that we find a way to restore the human as both political and rational. In Aristotle's day, the two political constructs were the city-state, polis, something like Luxembourg with a central urban center surrounded by outlying districts, and empire. The nation-state, which is taken as normative by modern political philosophy, is a fairly recent innovation, largely of the 19th century. There are still empires in the world today, and Russia is one of them. While the world today does abound with nation-states, there are major political entities that are not so simply arranged. The United Kingdom and Switzerland, as examples, are multi-nation states. The United States of America is a multi-state nation. The European Union is neither a nation, nor a state, nor an empire, and yet it has characteristics of each of those three political constructs. I use the more generic term country because to use nation or state seems determinative to a modern and contemporary meaning of those terms. Ukraine is situated between an empire, Russia, and several nation-states, the most important of which for Ukraine is Poland. Another way of stating the case is to say that Ukraine is situated between an empire, Russia, and a political entity that is neither a nation nor a state nor an empire, and yet which has the features of all three, as I've already said, the European Union. Russia understands Ukraine only as an organic part of itself, and outside of itself, Ukraine has no meaning. It does not exist. Ukraine, in sharp contrast to that view, understands Ukraine only as a free and sovereign political entity independent of Russia. Of what political construct is Ukraine? Of what political construct does Ukraine aspire to be? If the answers to those two questions are not the same, then how does Ukraine move from what it is to what it aspires to be? Clearly, we can multiply the countries and entities in relation to which one can, and at some point must, consider a just peace for Ukraine. But for the scope of this paper, Ukraine's relationships with Russia and Poland, respectively, are of preeminent consideration. There are certain Aristotelian metaphysical principles which I shall employ in the fashion of thought tools. First, metaphysics is the study of being qua being. One way to express this unphilosophically is to ask, what do we mean when we use the verb to be? We are having a conference. To be or not to be, a triangle is a closed three-sided geometric figure, the internal angles of which are equal to 180 degrees. What does the verb to be signify in those statements? The study of that question is metaphysics. Second, for Aristotle, there are four states of being: act, potency, generation, and corruption. Being in act and actuality is the end state of being. An oak tree is in a state of act as an oak tree. Potency is a state of non-being with the power to become. An acorn is not an oak tree, but has the power to become an oak tree. Generation, also called becoming, is the transition from potency to act. A sprouted acorn, an oak seedling, an oak sapling are all on their way to becoming an oak tree. Corruption can occur at any of the other three states of being. An acorn can rot. A seedling is subject to disease. An oak tree can be struck by lightning. Act precedes potency and is the cause of what the thing in potency can become. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Aristotle has no doubt. The chicken comes first because the chicken causes the egg to become a chicken, if it becomes anything. This is Aristotle's answer to the question of why, if acorns become anything, they can only become oak trees. Acorns cannot become frogs. Tadpoles cannot become oak trees, except in fairy tales. One more point on being in act. Aristotle realized that the way that something remains in act is by changing in a certain way. Fire, for example, remains in a state of actuality only as long as it burns, which is a state of change. So being in act depends not on just any sort of change, but on a kind of change peculiar to that state of actuality. And third, final cause is the cause for the sake of which something is done. A house is built for the sake of human dwelling. A knife is for the sake of cutting. An eye is for the sake of seeing. Final cause answers the question, to what end? So what is the final cause of a country? Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, and all my references, unless stated otherwise, are to that work, sets forth how to be the best possible citizen. But the citizen only exists in relation to some country. In setting forth the relationship between the two, Aristotle writes, though it is worthwhile to attain the end merely for one man, the citizen, it is finer and more godlike to attain it for a nation, ethnos, or a polis. These then are the ends at which our inquiry, being concerned with politics, aims. Justice is the end state, the final cause for both the citizen and country. But what is justice? How can justice be known? And how can it be established? Aristotle provides several definitions of justice. He states, the just then is the lawful and fair, the unjust, the unlawful, and the unfair. How does justice operate in the political community? Justice, he says, promotes and preserves happiness. Happiness, rightly understood, is the highest human end at which all human goods aim, and must therefore be the aim of politics. In other words, when all in a political community see that they are treated fairly, then those people are happy, if they are virtuous. As happiness is only possible within a country if there is prevalent justice, so there can only be happiness amongst countries if justice is prevalent amongst them. If Russia attacks Ukraine in an unjust war, which it has, then Ukraine cannot be happy, which in fact it is not. Happiness internal to a country is contingent upon just relations with other countries. Justice is the whole of virtue, but not absolutely, not without qualification, rather in relation to another. It is possible to have other virtues by oneself. I can be moderate all by myself. To be just, however, there have to be at least two people involved. Someone may be moderate and also unjust. Now, Aristotle gives a second definition of justice. Justice alone of the virtues is thought to be another's good. In his treatise, Politics, Aristotle observes that everyone understands justice for him or herself. It is justice for someone else that is difficult. Here we see the point where Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics, books 8 and 9, connects justice and friendship. Friendship is preeminently the relation with another. Justice is seeking the good of the other. This is absolutely key to understanding a just peace for Ukraine. A just peace must be just not only in relation to Ukraine, but also in relation to Russia and Poland. Aristotle tells us there are two kinds of justice, distributive and corrective. Distributive justice is the distribution of goods and evils in a fair way. Corrective justice is to correct injustices that occur. In the simplest kindergarten scenario, if the teacher gives every child a cookie except for one, the cry will arise, "That isn't fair." The distribution has been unjust. Regardless of generation, nationality, sex, religion, cultural bias, everyone sees that that would not be fair. There may be some who in theory would say otherwise, but when it is their cookie, they will be as quick as anyone else to see the injustice and to cry foul. As a matter of historical record, Russia excels in making exactly those kinds of claims. She understands justice for herself, but only rarely for any other country. If the kindergarten teacher distributes the cookies fairly and Johnny takes Tommy's cookie, then the teacher will exercise corrective justice, restoring Tommy's cookie and perhaps depriving Johnny of having any cookie at all for a day or two. Corrective justice is partly for the person who has suffered injustice, but it is far more important for the person who committed the injustice, because acting unjustly damages the person's soul. Corrective justice is not merely to right the external balance, but again, more importantly, to establish means for the healing of the soul. Aristotle has no interest in punishment qua punishment whatsoever. He does recognize that there are persons who are vicious, namely that they do wrong without wanting to do right. The vicious must be restrained to prevent them from doing injustice to others and from continuing to damage their own souls. Aristotle is convinced that as long as there is rationality, there remains the possibility of healing and restoration. To summarize, corrective justice restores goods to the harmed person, seeks to heal the one who has done injustice, and there's also a third consequence of corrective justice. It brings the life of the larger community back into balance, whether the community within a country or in the community amongst countries. Thus, justice restores equality. but proportional equality and not a literal numerical quantity. We speak of justice in relation to a sense of proportion. So what is the relationship of justice and friendship? Aristotle makes clear at the beginning of Book 8 that he is undertaking a politics of friendship. He calls friendship the glue of the polis, that which holds it together. Later, he qualifies this statement with further precision. He says that this quality of political friendship is concord or like-mindedness. Concord is the general agreement of the community in some fundamentally implicit way. Aristotle further observes that lawgivers care more for it than for justice. This friendship they aim at most of all and seek to expel faction as their worst enemy. And when men are friends, they have no need of justice, while when they are just, they need friendship as well. And the truest form of justice is thought to be a friendly quality. There are three kinds of friendship: utility, the relationships of daily commerce; second, pleasure, the relationships with people who are fun to be with; and third, the relationship of soulful intimacy between good human beings. Aristotle says that what all three of these types of friendship have in common is goodwill, which is mutual and conscious. Friendship at any level is living life obedient to intellect, which is the presence of the divine in human life. Within the broad community of implicit political friendship, there are smaller communities of friendship based upon relationships of utility, pleasure, and goodness, and which are as disparate as business relationships, a firefighting company, and a choir. And there are finally those friendships founded upon virtue and a high degree of commonality, friendships proper, simple, and complete. The more concord and the larger the community of concord, the more possible are the friendships of utility, pleasure, and goodness. At the same time, the more that there are friendships of utility, pleasure, and goodness, then the more likely is concord in the entire community, and the larger that community of concord can be. How does Aristotle's politics of friendship relate to Ukraine with respect to Russia and Poland? What kind of country does Ukraine want to be? Given her own distinct history, geography, climate, demography, and human and natural resources, how can friendship be established within Ukraine and between Ukraine and other countries? That is of necessity to ask, what is the metaphysical state of being between Ukraine and Russia? The friendship between Ukraine and Russia is in a state of corruption. The rational aim is to find ways to move that state of corruption to a state of potentiality. That the current Russian regime is vicious is obvious. What needs to happen? In the language of the kindergarten example, Russia must have its cookies taken away from it, and steps must be taken to prevent Russia from taking cookies from Ukraine or any other country. As every parent and teacher knows, if you reward bad behavior, you will get more bad behavior. This is not punishment, but rather corrective justice to address Ukraine's rightful grievances, to begin the healing of Russia's soul by teaching her what is expected in the community of nations, and to redress the enormous imbalance currently existing in the community of nations with respect to Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine. That is the starting point. And if that is done, then there's a reasonable likelihood that the Putin regime will fall. We cannot know what would follow, but the free moral agency of Russia must be respected. Russia should be prevented from doing harm to other countries, but Russians must determine their own future. When I listen to Vladimir Kara-Murza, hope is kindled in me that a rational future is possible. I say possible for Russia. I offer my own thought that much of the damage in the course of this war, due not only to Russia, but to numerous other countries, preeminently my own, arises from the failure to respect the free moral agency of other countries. In Poland, I suggest that the friendship between Ukraine and Poland is in a state of actuality. It is essential to remember, however, that actuality is only stable as a function of a certain kind of change. I want to bring in Aristotle's principle of mutuality and grace. Aristotle notes that even in the marketplace, there is a temple dedicated to the goddesses known as the Graces. Grace is a gift one has not deserved. These goddesses remind us that no matter how hard we may have worked, no matter how much we may have suffered, we always depend on some good in the world that we did not create or deserve. Here, Aristotle says something that is at least very close to the definition of mutuality. For this is the characteristic of grace, that we should serve in return one who has shown grace to us and should another time take the initiative in showing it. Poland has shown grace by forsaking its historical claims to Galicia and Volhynia and by its steadfast support of Ukraine against Russian aggression. I suggest that it is Ukraine's turn to show grace to Poland, not because Poland is right and Ukraine wrong. Grace is a free gift. It is not deserved. In successful marriages, one spouse defers to the other, not necessarily because the other is right, but in a spirit of grace to restore concord. For the sake of friendship with Poland, of profound importance to Ukraine's future, I suggest that Ukraine needs to take appropriate steps to address the legacy of Stepan Bandera and the massacre of Poles in Volhynia and Galicia, 1943-1944. The opening of doors for Ukraine to NATO and to the European Union depend upon it. In conclusion, where there is friendship, there is also justice. The political art lies then, first, in the examination of the existing metaphysical state of a country with respect to friendship. Second, in enacting the means necessary to achieve or maintain friendship within that country. Third, in assessing the condition of a country to other countries with respect to friendship. And fourth, in enacting the means necessary to achieve or maintain friendship with those other countries. The path to a just peace and to healing the wounds of war depend upon making the metaphysics of friendship a national priority for Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава, Professor Wilson, thank you very much. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And we are 5 minutes before we have to start our session with a question. So if someone would like to ask somebody, do not hesitate and do not be so humble as you are humble. Because if we will not have a question, then we will have a break and we will start sooner than we expected. So, Father Oleg.
Well, maybe not as a question, maybe as a remark, because I was moved by the criticism from Helen Zorkragen, and I hope you're still here, Helen, because you mentioned that the bishops of UGC did not recognize fully the voice of women and children, and I entirely agree with you that the care, ethics of care, is extremely powerful addition, development to our understanding of ethics of justice. So I just want to express my hope that there will be a new document. So I try to show in my presentation that the bishops have already been addressing these questions from different angles, and this is already a fourth document. And I do hope that there will be a development. That this is something that I just wanted to mention and well, express my hope. Right.
Thank you, Oleg, for that. If I may, Father Yuri, if I may respond to that. Yeah. Thank you, dear friend Oleg Kindi. Yeah, and thank you for explaining the fullness of the letter. And actually, our papers could have been better in the order that yours would have been first and then mine second, because I want to emphasize how important the letter is, and that it is profound, and it is a very strong voice for just peace and for calling to the whole world that Russia's destruction of the international order is not only the elimination of Ukraine as its goal, but the whole world order is potentially destroyed by that. And my question to you would be, so I try to be in some dialogue with the letter, and that is a way of also valuing its content and the call from the letter. So you said it is a lonely voice, and what we miss is the voices of the other synods of bishops all around the world. So how does it come that the voices of Ukrainian churches are so less noticed? Perhaps they are heard, but there are no responses to these voices. They are not really listened to, and there is no active dialogue in the sense that also others engage in the questions of what is just peace for today and for Ukraine and for the world. What is your explanation? Where is the ecclesial diplomacy of Ukraine is, to my view, rather strong and very active in several countries, including the United States and the Vatican. So how does it come that there is so little response and that you still call it a lonely voice?
Well, yeah, thank you for your question. I can't give a comprehensive answer to this, but I think it's a question of leadership. I think Pope Francis's position has been, even though on the one hand he does recognize this as an unjust war, but he also tries to appeal to the Russian state and to the Russian people and recognize their importance in the world. And we just heard a presentation on how it is important to build friendship, and I think Vatican diplomacy is kind of in its rethinking, and I think very slow rethinking of its so-called Ostpolitik, that was important for Vatican to build positive relationships with the Russian Orthodox Church, and it was done for the last 30 years with 1991 big crisis because of Ukraine, and now we kind of went over the understanding of why Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church went from underground and why 5 million Ukrainians who officially were so-called Russian Orthodox and suddenly became Catholics, so to say. So there is a kind of a rethinking in the Vatican of how to treat new reality in Central Eastern Europe. But I think this reassessment has not gone to its completion. So I think people in the Vatican themselves do not know what to do next. In 1983, where some of the documents I mentioned, there was a strong leadership of the Catholic bishops in the United States. They provoked the whole discussion of the nuclear weapons and proliferation, and what happened with new bombs that were installed in Germany, in West Germany, in order to deter the Soviet push, so to say. So when there is a strong leadership, then there is a response. But perhaps I don't know. The Vatican leadership today, I think, is still maturing, so to say. I will end this in such a soft way, so to say. But I myself am discouraged, by the way, by such a weak response from the. It is important to look for, if you want to find Francis's calling of Russian aggression as unlawful, you really have to go into some interviews and not into statements, which are more natural for moral assessment of things. And Pope Francis has not done that. And I think it's for the sake of that so-called Ostpolitik that is still kind of in the corridors of Vatican. But I think it will change over time, and I think there will be a change of leadership in Vatican in several years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Lach. Thank you, Professor Zondrager. We have a question from our participants, and Father Yuri Martinyuk will read it aloud.
Yes, we have one, maybe two questions from our online follower, Danong Kurnia 1, and it's the next. The first, I would like to hear more about nation in the era post-ideology. The second, I did not hear any approach from emotion. The only thing I heard that love is matter to achieve justice. If it can be characterized as part of emotion, is valid to approach the problem, why we never approach the problem of conflict and war from emotion? I would love to have response from any of you. I think we can address these two questions to Professor Jeffrey Dirk Wilson. If you can comment this question, please do it.
Yeah, I'm happy to address it. If you could maybe briefly restate them, because I had trouble making out. I think the first question was it about corrective justice, or I'm not sure.
You can see the question in chat. The first was hear more about nation in the era post-ideology.
Got it. Okay, so post-ideology. So yes. So so for example, in communism, there are very few communists left. There are some, but certainly, I mean, there's nothing in the Russian leadership that's being driven by the ideology of communism. I mean, it could be argued that the last communist leader of the Soviet Union was Nikita Khrushchev, and after that, with Brezhnev going forward, that it's a kind of practicality. Just making, having Soviet Union at the top, but without respect to, only in a window dressing kind of way with reference to any kind of classic Marxist-Leninism. And then, on the right, you have the liberal order that's being challenged everywhere. I mean, it's being challenged in the United States. It's being challenged in Germany. I mean, with the AfD, it's being, in Romania. It's been watching those elections. It's being, Viktor Orban explicitly says that he is for an illiberal order. I mean, sort of go through the list. So, I mean, these were the two great ideas that were driving politics in the 20th century. And the third one that's still around is the fascism of Benito Mussolini. And I would suggest that what we have today is kind of fascism through the lens of Carl Schmitt's friend enemy. And I'm taking a posture very explicitly against Carl Schmitt and his friend enemy distinction. Hobbes is better. The war of all against all. At least we're in the same boat together with Hobbes. But with Schmitt, it's us and them. And so you're always, when you have the enemy without, you have the enemy within, and you make war on those enemies. So what I would suggest is that what we have today is what I call hyphenated fascism, democratic fascism, Islamofascism, Tsarist fascism. That's what we have in Russia today, Tsarist fascism. Arguably in China, Maoist fascism. But it is this, and what do we see there? The destruction of the boundary between the private and the public sphere, the militarization of civil society, the glorification of the leader. These are all aspects of fascism that are very prominent across the spectrum of countries today. And let me also say, I'm a great admirer of the 1937 encyclical Mit brennender Sorge. It was a high water mark. But let us also remember, the idea that the Vatican was, standing up for things in the 20th century and they're not today. Well, it took Pius XI 4 years to figure out that he needed to take a stand against Hitler. In 1933, he was negotiating the Concordat with Hitler that I think still governs Vatican-German relations. It did when I was a student in Germany in 1974-5. When in 1933, when Karl Barth was leading Reformed and Lutherans in putting together the Barmen Declaration against the ideology of the leader, the Catholic Church was making a deal with Hitler. And then often Pius XI is criticized for, and Pius XII more, Pius XII was criticized for abandoning the Jews, but he abandoned Polish Catholics. I mean, Poland's the one country where there are about as many non-Jews killed by the Soviets and the Nazis as Jews. And the Polish Catholics were abandoned. So I don't think this is a new thing of the Vatican having its own internal political way of thinking about things that is a distorted lens. Anyway, those, I've talked too much, but those were all things that I was thinking about. What I have about hyphenated fascism, I took out of my paper because it was too long. And the other were remarks that I was thinking about when I was listening to Father Kendi's discussion and reflections.
Thank you very much, Professor.
I would like to reflect also, but on the other question of Danang, on the role of emotions in the conflict. I think it was, but perhaps a bit more hidden in the letter of the Ukrainian bishops. Emotion is there where the role of ressentiment of Russia is highlighted. Ressentiment as one of the factors driving to war. We have been treated unfairly by history or by the West or by the world, but ressentiment is an emotion, and the letter points, among others, to that emotional level of Russia's motivation for its military aggression. And from the more positive side, I would say it is empathy in the ethics of care, or also in an ethics of justice corrected by an ethics of care. It is the role of empathy. It is the ability to connect with the otherness, and also to try to imagine the world from the perspective of the other. And that is an emotional and deeply relational and even ontological quality that people people have as an anthropological characteristic. So that is a view on what is the human being. A human being is rational, but the ethics of care combines that immediately with it is rational. A human being is rational and empathic. A human being is able to connect to others and to view the world from the perspective of the other as well. And that is, I think, in every conflict, an emotional level that should be found to, not to let hatred reign your soul, to keep yourself human, and also to be able to keep the human ability of empathy.
Could I come in on that and to build on what has just been so beautifully said? Friendship depends on feelings. It's not primary, but it's secondary. But the friendly feeling is not only that I have goodwill for someone, but I have a friendly feeling toward that person, and that's. And this goes back to actuality depends on a certain sort of change. It doesn't matter how intimate a friendship may be, the friendship of marriage or of best friends or amongst parents and children or siblings, we fall out of the feeling. The feeling falls away. And one of the tasks is, how do I renew this feeling? And part of how that works is through grace. Is that I take the step, I initiate some free gift to the other to reawaken that friendly feeling. So I think the metaphysics of friendship, I didn't address this, and in fact, I'm going to make a note to add this, that there's an emotional character to the metaphysics of friendship, which I think the philosophies of Hobbes and Kant and Schmidt completely miss. Hobbes conceives politics in terms of mechanics. It has to do with mechanical actions. It has to do with contracts. Whereas in a politics of friendship, it embraces the feelings. So I hope that is in support of what's just been said. And thank you for the question, which helps me think more deeply about my own thesis of friendship.
Thank you very much, Professor Wilson. Thank you very much, Professor Zordrager. We have one more question from our doctorand, Andriy Tretyak.
Thank you once again for your for all the presentation. And my question is for Professor Wilson, as the picture you try to present with all this friendship as a core that has to be in during the relationship with other countries is very nice and very good looking, but isn't it more in the side of wishful thinking? Because what we can see in global politics, and we as Ukrainians learned very well, that global politics and relationship between countries is more like a relationship based on selfishness and self-interest of any particular country. Even in the recent book of Polish journalists who analyzed the relationship between Ukrainian president and Polish president, that all this personal relationship of friendship that they diminished very quickly, and all this political background moved again, and it was the main frame of relationship between Ukraine and Poland, not the personal relationship of friendship. So my question is how to bring this good theory into action in our unperfect world, yes, and our world more interested, more focused on personal interest, personal in the sense of any other country, not global society of people who live in different countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I want to argue, and again, I had 20 minutes and I was too long even at that, but I want to argue that a politics of friendship is the only practical politics, because as long as the other countries are not in a state of friendship, they're going to be in a state of enmity. And in Aristotle's framework, friendship and corruption. So until Russia can somehow be made to be friends with Ukraine, and I'd like to go back to the childhood examples. There's a wonderful book that was published some years ago in America called Everything I Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And I think that if we think about this in terms of children, that two boys have a fight, and there's some adult, one of their parents or the teacher or whoever, says, "Now I want you to shake hands and be friends," right? And this is hard to do with nations, especially a nation with nuclear weapons. But until Russia is made to be the friend of Ukraine, Ukraine will be in existential danger. I think that's just a fact. So what do? Okay, well, at first, it does need to be restrained because they're acting viciously. But I think that any time that we see something that is encouraging, I've been very encouraged by the amount of press coverage that Vladimir Kara-Murza has gotten. And that's not to say that everything he says is what Ukraine will agree with, but he denounces the war and he wants a rational, positive future for Russia. So you have to say, so where are our partners? And I do think that one of the ways in which Ukraine has been a threat to Russia is that Ukraine has shown that you can have been part of the Soviet Union and go in a different direction, that you can give people freedom, that you can have real elections, that you can have a vigorous civil society. And indeed, I would say, I don't have that much experience with Ukraine, but I would say, as much as the military, it has been the civil society which has been the great strength of Ukraine in this war. So it doesn't happen all at one time. You have to take one step at a time along the way, but we have to know that that's what we're aiming for. So again, how do we move from a state of corruption to a state of potentiality, where there's the possibility of friendship? And I think that's I think this is where Uku could ask Vladimir Kara-Murza this question: what can we do to move from corruption to potentiality in our relationship with Russia for the future? And I would be very interested to know what such a thoughtful and great-souled man as Karamurza would say to a question like that. So anyway, these are thoughts that I've been having over these past months, ever since the title of this conference was announced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And do we have any other questions? If not, let's have 20-minute break, and then we will return to our second session panel. And one more time, I would like to express my big gratitude to the participants and speakers of the first panel. Thank you very much for your contribution to Just Peace in Ukraine, because your voices are very important for us, and your knowledge that you are sharing with us are also giving us hope. Once again, thank you very much.